Welcome to the Red Dad Podcast, where we'll be exploring the trials and triumphs of being a father, men's mental health, and any other topic that inspires us to be rad. Through a series of interviews, your host, Jace Kelly, will be discussing and discovering the best ways to become a rad dad. Now your host, Jace.
All right, welcome to the Rad Dad Podcast. This is episode number 12. I have my father-in-law of 9 years, John Bair, here with me. So when I first started this podcast, I had like 15 names of who I want on, and you were on that list, but I wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing before I had you on, because you're like an audio guy, and your voice is, so beautiful on a mic. So I wanted to make sure everything was locked down before I had you on, but thanks for coming on.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So,
has it really been 9 years?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
9 years in January.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, we've known each other for 9 years, I guess.
Yeah.
But just to start off, tell me a little bit about your childhood and just growing up, what you observed from your father, stuff that you guys did together.
Man, So I grew up in Manti, Utah, a little bitty farm town. It's about probably 80 miles from here, 75, 80 miles. And growing up, my dad worked as a diesel mechanic, and he worked on a sheep ranch. And as long as I can remember, my dad has been like my ride or die. Yeah. And, you know him well. Yeah. He's a fun character. He's a goer. I mean, he's 77, 78 now. And here a week ago, me and him went and climbed the mountain right here by your house, just straight up. And he's carrying the big pack and just go, go, go. And it's been like that for as long as I can remember. I mean, he's always been the hardest working guy I've ever been around. Yeah. And, always wanted to jump in and help out anybody. He'd do anything for anybody. And, if I look at all the people in my life that I would think, that's the guy I want to pattern my life after. Or that's the guy I want my kids to grow up and think, if there's one person I want to be like, it would, it'd definitely be my dad.
Yeah. Did he, I guess looking back on your childhood, did he go out of his way to teach you hard work, or was it like just lead by example and that's just how you live your life?
Well, they still live in the house I grew up in there. Yep. And out behind his shop, he's got a great big shop there. And behind that shop wasn't there when I was a kid, but half of the shop and all the way clear back to that back fence was a garden. That whole thing was a garden. And every spring we'd go out and plant that garden. And, if I wasn't in school in the summer, I was either working with him on the farm or doing something with him, or I was home, and he would always tell me, I want you to weed that garden. And, now it doesn't seem, it's a job, but now I could do the whole thing in a couple hours. When I was a little kid, that just seemed like an insurmountable task. And, he'd go out there, he'd get home from working all day on the farm, fixing trucks, whatever he was doing. And he'd go out there and work with me, but, he didn't let me off the hook. It was, and he'd tell me, if you just knuckle down, you'll be done in a little while. Well, I didn't want to knuckle down. I wanted to sit there and think about all the other things I'd rather be doing, fishing or riding my horse or whatever else. Yep. And, he'd come home, and in a couple hours would have it done because he was there working with me. I'd go out on the farm, and he had a bale wagon that, you'd pull around with the tractor that'd haul the hay, load the hay, and then stack it. And if the bales weren't set up on edge, if they were laying flat, the bale wagon couldn't pick them up. So he'd have me walk up and down those rows in front of the tractor and tip the bales up. And I just thought that was the worst job ever. And now, I mean, that kind of stuff's therapy. I'd love to be able to go walk up and down those hay rows and stand those bales up. So he, And he was So to answer your question, I'd say it was kind of both, teaching me by making me get out there and working, but also it didn't matter what we were doing, what task we were doing, who was there to help or whatever. And even still to this day, if Dad's there, he's the hardest working guy.
Yeah.
We all get together, and a few years ago we put a roof on my house, and then a couple years later we put a roof on my aunt's house, and we've worked on my grandpa's house and done that. And Dad, he's just he's just always the hardest working guy there. So it's hard not to. It seemed like if I was there myself doing the task, it wasn't that hard to be lazy. But if Dad was there, he was working so hard, you couldn't be lazy. You had to jump in as much as you didn't want to. You had to jump in and work alongside of him because, I'm sure your dad, grandpa being a farmer, ranch guy like that, their work ethic just demands respect, and you can't help but get in and, well, some people can. I mean, I know people that are fine being lazy. I never could be around them without jumping in and sweating alongside them.
That's interesting. That's a different kind of motivation than, having him yell at you. Just being able to lead by example. It's like when Dad's around, we work. It's pretty dang cool to have that. He seems like, from my observation, he doesn't have a stop. He just has a lower gear.
Well, that's a good way to put it. He's, now he's getting a few years on him, and I always think, one of these days I'm going to be able to outwalk him, or I know the other day walking up the hill, he still walked me in the ground. And is it harder on him? I'm sure it is.
You'd never know though.
He ain't letting me know that.
Yeah.
He's doing everything he can to just give it all he's got. And now my nephew, my youngest sister's boy, him and my dad are best buddies. They went to Colorado this last year and hiked a 14,000 foot peak in a day. Most people, I don't know if I could do it, but they did. And he, he does stuff all the time. There's, this Mount Nebo right here by us that's, I don't know how tall it is, 11, 12,000 feet, something like that. Last summer he called me and he was huffing and puffing. And I said, "Where are you?" He says, "Well, I'm on the South Peak." I says, "The South Peak of where?" "South Peak at Nebo." I says, "Why?" And he goes, "Just to make sure I can still do it." And so, I think to that generation, more so than nowadays, hard work was something that you just, that kind of was the measure of what kind of a person you were. It, if a guy was, the worst thing you could call somebody was lazy. Now I think a lot of people are pretty entitled, and it don't bother people to be lazy. Boy, Dad, he was not that way. And, still to kind of go back to your point, still to this day, he doesn't really have an off switch. He'll gear it down once in a while and kick back for a few minutes. And then a few minutes later, he's up out in the shop fixing something for somebody, out riding one of his mules. He's 78 years old and still shoes his own animals. And so if anybody's ever put shoes on a horse or a mule or anything like that, he still does it. And it's like no big deal to him. I'm sure it's a bigger deal than he lets on, but boy, he still doesn't. Doesn't shy from hard work.
Are there any lessons that you've learned from him that other people probably don't learn from their dads?
Boy, I don't know. Just as you're asking me that, I remember I was pretty lucky to grow up just down the street from my great grandpa. Okay. When my great grandpa was like 82, they moved into a house that didn't have a basement. And he took a shovel and a 5-gallon bucket and dug a basement under his house. And my dad went over and helped him. Why are you helping him? Why don't you talk him out of it? Oh, no, he made up his mind. That's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And he told me one day we had this chainsaw sitting in the shop that was just huge. I said, whoever bought that chainsaw, why'd they buy it so big? And he said, well, your great-grandpa bought that because he needed some lumber. And so he fashioned this stand that he could hold this chainsaw on, and basically made a little lumber mill right there, so that he could cut some rough cut lumber. And I says, the first thing that comes to my mind is, wouldn't it be easier just to go buy it? Wouldn't it be, and Dad, and I told her, I says, wouldn't it be easier just to buy it? And he told me, and I'll never forget this, and it's been a long time ago, he told me, he goes, the amount of work and it being easy is not anything your grandpa ever worried about. If he needed to do something, he just did it. And the amount of work, and he was born, my great grandpa was born in 1901, so lived through the Depression, grew up farming, ranching. And I think that lesson, a lesson that, or at least something my dad said to me that I look around the world, and not that I'm always the shining example of how to be, but I think about that a lot, that he told me, the amount of work or how hard it was, didn't calculate in. If it needed done, it got done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah. One other thing that a lesson I learned from my dad that kind of a little different was, my boy, your brother-in-law, always been a super good guy. Kind of laid back, a little easygoing, wasn't always a big talker. Both of his sisters were both way more outgoing than him, but tough kid, loved to play football. Didn't care about his schoolwork too much, just wasn't a priority to him. Never really got in trouble, good kid, but was a little more laid back. And one day I was getting on him about his schoolwork or something like that, and his mom and his sisters thought I was being a little hard on him. And so, what do? They called Grandma, my mom, and told her, hey, John's being a little hard on her brother. And immediately my phone rings, and that's one downturn to having a cell phone. Everybody having a cell phone, you can't get away from anybody now, you know. Especially if your mom's calling, you can't send mom to voicemail. So I answer the phone. Are you being mean to my grandbaby? I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, one of the girls had called and says, yeah, Dad was getting on the grand a little bit. And she says, you better be nice to him. I says, Mom, I'm being nice to him. Don't worry about it. I'm being nice to him. Then my dad called me and says, boy, your mom was ready to wring your neck, for getting on the grand. I says, I know. And I explained the situation to him. He says, well, as a dad, sometimes a lot of times it falls to us to discipline and, to get after people a little bit and that. He goes, and he kind of gave me an example. He says, me and you have spent more time together doing stuff than most fathers and sons ever will. Yeah. And he goes, what time you have with that boy is precious. And he said, I want you to think all the good times we had. And he says, don't screw that up with your own son. He says, so when you're disciplined, when it's time you discipline, you got to push them to do stuff in school. They won't remember what you say so much, but they'll definitely remember how you make them feel. And so you don't have that much time with your kids. And boy, now looking back, like you said, you and Katie are going on 9 years. Boy, those years don't last very long when you have those kids. And Dad told me, he says, even when you have to discipline, and because my dad was strict, very strict, but he was never mean. And if I needed, getting after, he got after me. But I never for 1 second questioned whether or not he loved me and whether or not he was still my best friend. Yeah. So I kind of, that conversation with him, I think that might have changed my perspective a little bit on how I dealt with my kids. And I thought a little more about, when we had to have a tough conversation about school or about what time we got in last night or something like that, they may not always remember what you say, but they will definitely always remember how you make them feel.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And one thing I'm learning from the podcast and just being a father is I think the easy route is parenting from the sidelines, it's easy to just tell your kids what to do, but the hard part is preaching, or living what you preach, and living that example, and that's where the learning comes in. So
well, and what, talk about my dad being a kind of a hard-boiled old farm boy, small town farm boy, diesel mechanic. I mean, he can weld, he can do any tough job he knows how to do. And when he was working on the farm, the guy that owned the farm and the ranch, he was just the busiest guy ever, and he'd come and go, and all the time you never knew if he was going to be there, but because he just was working. I asked Dad one day, why in the world do you get up so early to go to work? And he says, well, it's always kind of a race between me and Lee, the guy that owned the ranch, Lee R. He says, it's kind of a race between me and Lee R. to see who can open the gate in the morning. He says, and he'll beat you. He says, if the boss is the hardest working guy, he says, everybody around him has to work. I mean, you just, if you're worth keeping, you got to work as hard as the boss. Yep. And so I think, that's a good example to set too for our kids, is if we're willing to work hard, not just at our jobs, not just at school, but on our relationship as a family. If we're, willing to put time and effort into our kids and make them, feel important, feel special, know that their activities, the things they're doing, mean a lot to us, that their success means a lot to us, they're going to feel that. And it's easy to say that now, having raised 3 amazing kids and looking back and thinking all the times that I wish I would have made them feel more of a priority, and I could probably go talk to them and they'll all tell me, oh no, it was great. Everything was great. But, I can tell you those years don't last long. Make your kids feel like they're a priority. Let them know how proud you are. And, my dad's told me this a few times, and I've told my kids, that the highest points in my life, all the things that I feel like I've accomplished in my life, are nothing compared to the high points that I've experienced with my kids. Their success, whether it's, I see you and Katie up there with Lincoln, and seeing you guys parent, who is now one of my 2 favorite people on the planet, Lincoln and MJ, seeing you guys interact with the grandkids and seeing how you work so hard, to be good parents, to provide. Those are my highest points, seeing the kind of people that my kids have turned into.
Do you feel like you get more satisfaction seeing your kids be successful than you've ever felt, as far as personal satisfaction?
100%. And it's hard to put into words, but you feel like if you raise, a quality, successful person, I'm going to use Katie for an example, you feel like to a degree your life's a success. People have told me a million times, you did such a good job raising Katie, and me and, her mom have said a few times, we really didn't feel like we did much. Katie was just born and grew up in our house. She was always kind of that way, even just from a little kid.
Yeah.
She's always been very independent. That she's incredibly independent. She's very scheduled, very driven. I remember one day she comes in, she's like, Dad, you never asked me about my homework. You never asked me about my homework. I'm like, well, you always do your homework. You get straight A's. What's the problem?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it would be nice if you'd ask me about it sometimes. I'm like, okay. So a couple weeks later, I come in and, you got your homework done. And she's like, Dad, when have I ever not got my homework done? What? Like, you don't think I'm going to, so she wanted me to check on her, but then also she was like, really? You think I'm not going to do my homework? And it was, that was kind of a funny exchange there for a couple weeks. So I'd ask her, your homework's done, right? And I kind of learned how to phrase the question so she knew that I expected her to do it, but I also knew that she probably had done it. And I was just checking in to make sure she was okay. And seeing her, when she was in drill team and all those kind of things in high school, and she was in the Miss Springville Mapleton pageant and really put herself out there, did a fantastic job. And I mean, I went up and gave her a big hug after and cried like a baby, and she probably looking at me like, "What are you doing, Dad?" And I was so proud of her. Just, when you see your kids stretch their abilities a little bit, put themselves out there, and be successful. That's, for me, those are the highest points in my life. I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything I've ever accomplished personally,
Oh, that gets me super excited for the next 20 years.
If there's one thing, and you come from a very competitive, very active family with your wrestling and martial arts and all kinds of things. Everything you guys have ever done, you've been really good at, and been very competitive with. And I'm telling you, there's there's nothing like watching your kids succeed. There just isn't. And we talk about Katie's brother a little bit, and when he was a kid, I was one of his little league football coaches, and never forget, we were playing in a playoff game, and he played really good, really, really good, and he tackled the quarterback in the end zone and got a safety, scored 2 points. We're driving home, and everybody was just making a big deal about it while we were at the field and just going crazy. And, "Man, you scored a safety. You scored a safety.
Yeah.
You scored 2 points. You scored a safety." We're in the truck driving home, me and him. We stopped, and got an ice cream like you do after a Little League football game. And we were just about home. He goes, "Dad?" I go, "What?" He goes, "What's a safety?" So, but, because in Little League football, that's not a common thing. So I kind of laughed with him, and I still think about that. I think about, in the high school game when, he hit the quarterback so hard, the guy, not that you'd ever want anybody to get hurt, but it took the kid a few minutes to get up. And, when your kids have highlights like that in whatever they're involved with, boy, you remember those things. And it's, as a parent, it definitely helps you feel like you've been to some degree successful raising your kids. There's a bucket full of things too I'd look back at and just cringe and think, "Oh, if I could only do that again." Or not do that again, or however it goes. But I definitely think that, personally, if I could go back and help my kids have more of those experiences, I would definitely do that. I would definitely sacrifice things that at the time I thought were important and try to help them have more of those high point successful moments. If I would have had any idea how important and those things are to me now and how fulfilling those things are to me now to be able to look back on, I'd have done everything I could to make more of them. Interesting.
Well, I guess in adulthood, there are plenty of opportunities to still have those moments, and parenthood as well. So,
and I was talking to my dad the other day, and while we were climbing the mountain, like I mentioned, I told him, of course I talk about my kids all the time. They're the highlights of my life. And I told him, with Katie's brother, being in the military and some of the things he's accomplishing and that, and talking to my dad about it. And I says, I always knew he was tough. I didn't know he was that kind of tough. And he goes, he says, kids grow up and change, and the things they accomplish. He said, it's really rewarding. And he says, that's one good thing he said about getting old is he says that goes on for generation after generation, because now he's looking at his grandkids. He's got my nephew that's, just an amazing football player. He's an amazing wrestler. He's the student body, or he was the class president in his school. He's just a 4.0 student. And he says, you see your grandkids doing great things. And now he's watching, Katie, his granddaughter, be an amazing parent, and having Lincoln and watching you guys raise Lincoln, and he says it's just so rewarding to see that go on, not just to your kids, but to the next generation also.
I think that reward comes with the price. All those years of fatherhood and the sacrifices and working and making ends meet, it all comes down to where he's at now.
Yep.
And he has this big family, and he can sit in his yard with satisfaction and eat a hamburger and be happy.
Oh yeah, and that's some of the greatest thing. You've been there to some of those barbecues and stuff. We go down to my folks' house, and that's my mom and dad. They love to just sit back and watch the great grandkids play with the grandkids and the nieces and nephews and their cousins and everybody. And it's incredibly rewarding, and it's fun to look at my parents and your parents and see them at a point in their life where they can really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see your parents, kind of start to age and get old and have health problems and stuff like that. And I often think it's a scary thought. And I know a lot of people lose their parents at a very young age, and my heart aches for those people. Not that, a lot of them haven't just thrived and been incredibly successful and dealt with their situation, but I can't imagine my life without my dad. I just can't. And I know that's how the system's set up, and one day, we bury our parents, but boy, the size of that hole that would leave just is scary. And I think, my darkest days in my life, it was really, my parents that held me up and got me through.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure, you have a really close family. I'm sure there's times where you can think of when you really leaned on your parents, and I think that's how it's supposed to be. That's why we have parents.
Yeah, I agree. So that leads really well into my next question. I want to get your thoughts on this. So 2 weeks ago, I drove with my dad to Heber to pick up some beef. Mm-hmm. We took my truck, to get the whole family all their cut beef. He grew up in Heber. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful country.
Yeah. Well, Midway, I guess, if you know where Midway is.
Even better.
Yep.
Even better.
And we were just talking about his dad, Grandpa Kelly, who's someone I had a close relationship with and looked up to. And we started talking about the similarities between Grandpa Bair and Grandpa Kelly. And that whole generation, just the grit that they have. And I asked him, and I want to ask you the same question, what happens to the world when those people are gone?
Boy, that's a thought that's not fun to think, really.
Yeah.
I mentioned my great grandpa that I knew really well. My grandpa, you know my grandpa pretty well. Still lives up the road here just a little ways. He just turned 99 the other day, and he fits right into that too. You talk about the grit. Boy, if there's anything the world's missing today, it's grit, and I think it's getting harder to see every day as that generation passes on. You've heard Joe Rogan. I don't know who the original quote is that hard men make good times make soft men make hard times make hard men.
Yeah. And
kind of that circle. I think we're probably somewhere in that, where the hard man, the gritty, hardworking guys that lived, through the Depression, through a lot of the wars and that, are about gone. I think my dad was born in 1944, and he got a draft notice to go to Vietnam while he was on his mission, and they let him defer it till he got off his mission. By that time, they'd quit the draft, so he came that close to being drafted into Vietnam. That I don't know that. I don't know how the world could possibly be the same without those kind of people.
Yeah.
And we talk about dads a lot, but I'm here to tell you, my dad is tough. My mom is just as tough in a very different kind of way, I think. You know, she lost her mom left when she was like 3 years old, and she basically grew up without a mom her whole life, her and her brothers and sisters. And I mean, my mom is just tough as nails too. Sweet as pie, but tough as nails. I think that generation taught a lot of people how to deal with struggles, how to work hard. They've done amazing things, and the world changes, but I don't know exactly how to answer that question. The world will definitely be different.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be better off because they're gone. I definitely think there'll be some, like you mentioned, the grit. You know what? You look at the amazing things that happen in this world, and as much as technology drives our way of life now, and as much as we all do business on our cell phones and over the internet and that, somebody's got to build the roads. Somebody's got to build all those buildings we sit in while we're using our phones and that.
Yep.
There has to be hardworking, gritty men and women that are willing to work all day and then, do the kind of jobs that when you go home and get in the shower at night, the bottom of the tub is black.
Yeah.
And, I think that generation really showed us what hard work, not the sit on the computer kind of hard work, the end of a shovel hard work can do, because the population of this country, of the world, is exploded during their lifetime. Mm-hmm. And they've built the infrastructure, they've won the wars, they've done all the things to get us to this point, and they've set us up pretty darn well.
Yeah.
I mean, as we hear all the scare of the economy and all things going on right now, I live a very good life.
Yeah.
And it's because of people like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, back to what you quoted from the Joe Rogan podcast, we're in pretty dang good times right now. And if that pattern holds true, it's going to create weak men.
Well, and I think the hard times that could be headed our way, as much as I hate to say it, it's going to make sure that the men that Lincoln is going to grow into to be one of these days are going to have to be pretty hard men.
Yeah.
That's
my theory, and that's a big reason why I started the podcast, because I want to make sure I nail my part in raising him.
Yeah. And it doesn't any I was watching a very popular TV show the other night. The one guy turned to the other guy and says, it scares the heck out of me to think what kind of world I'm leaving my kids to. And, boy, I think about that all the time. But then I think, I look at, we'll talk about Katie, your wife. She's very driven. She's a hard worker. She's the kind of person that if she tells me, Dad, we're going to come visit you at 7:00, and then she thinks it's going to be 7:05 before she gets there, she calls and makes sure it's still going to be okay. She's very responsible. And as much as I don't want to have her go through hard times, I know that she's going to be just fine whatever happens.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of person she is. I feel like that's the kind of person you are. Her little sister and her little brother and that, that's why it's important above anything else to do our best as a parent. And I ain't saying that I've done a great job, because, man, I'm telling you, I got some I got some errors on my scorecard, I tell you. But if you raise your kids to work hard, teach them that responsibility is something that they need to take serious, that how they treat people matters. Be good people. Even if there is hard times, no matter what happens, they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay.
So the 3 kids that you raised are 3 of my top 10 people in the world, and I love them all to death. Were there certain principles or lessons that you made sure to teach them in their upbringing?
Yeah, and and I think that they all probably grasped different ones, because
each of them are so unique.
they are so different.
It's not like Emma's like Katie or LeGrand's like
they
Emma.
are all awesome.
Yeah.
They're all amazing people, and they are all so different.
Yeah.
You look at Katie and Emma for being sisters. Katie's a little taller with brown eyes. Emma's a little shorter with blue eyes. And I'm telling you, it starts there, and they are so different. Emma's a little more of a fly by the seat of her pants and, just let the chips fall where they may. Katie's a lot more structured. And I think just their personalities, Katie has always been one that was kind of a leader. And so you kind of had to approach, her growing up and what you taught her from that perspective. Other kids are watching you. The kids that, that sit in the back of the Sunday school class, or that, don't have friends at lunchtime or things like that.
Yeah.
You're the one that how you treat those people, the other kids are going to follow. You have a chance, as kind of a leader to really set the tone in your group for how things are done and what's said and how kids are treated. And, Katie was always really good with that. She's just been top notch, from, like I said, people always say, oh, you did such a good job with her. I don't feel like I really did much. She just grew up in the house and turned out really good. She's a pretty easy kid. Her sister, was just probably, I think school came a little easier to Emma. Katie always got great grades, and Katie worked her tail off. Emma probably didn't have to work as hard, and school wasn't, she didn't have to work as hard probably. And so wasn't a big deal to her. She got good grades, and it wasn't that big of a deal because she didn't have to work that hard, so maybe it didn't mean as much to her. But she was a little more susceptible to social pressures, I would say. And so she probably worried a little more about what her friends thought. And if a boy was mean to her, I think it was probably she let it affect it maybe a little more than her sister did. And so you had to approach it a little different and, let her know that, hey, we're all individuals. There's 7, and that's one thing that Katie, if a boy made her bad, gone. She's like, Dad, there are 7 billion people on this world. I will find another dude. So I tell you, that says a lot for you. Because
that's a great compliment.
Right? And Emma, when one of her friends would hurt her feelings or something like that, it was just the end of the world for her. And it was just really, really hard on her because with her friendships and her relationships, she was just all in.
Yeah.
And
which is awesome.
It's awesome.
She's
awesome. And she's so loyal and so genuine. And when somebody didn't return that, it was just devastating to her. And so it was, and so we had to tell them, with Katie, you just approach things a little different. Emma, we'd have to tell her all the time and reiterate, just because somebody doesn't see your value and has hurt you and made you feel bad, don't think for one second that value's not there.
Yeah.
And, and then you look at their brother, and he was just like, whatever. I'm going fishing. I don't care what's going on. I'm going to go to the football game. I'm going to go hang out with my buddy up the street. It's like, dude, you've got to get your homework done. Graduation's coming, and it's not going to be a good day for us if you don't get your homework done. Yeah, okay. And then like 10 minutes later, he'd have a samurai sword and a baseball bat and a fishing pole and be walking to his buddies. What are you doing? Just out doing boy stuff.
Yeah.
And, he was just so easygoing, happy-go-lucky. And now the things, he's accomplishing in the military and stuff, I'm just like, I told him the other day when I was talking to him on the phone, we laughed about it, Katie and Emma, that's one thing I'll say about both of them. If there was an assignment needed done, they did it. And they didn't, they didn't put it off.
Yeah.
They were really good that way. Their brother, one day I walk home I walk in the house and I walk upstairs and I'm like, something's not right here. And I just happened to look in his room and there's all these boxes lined up along the edge of his bed. And I'm like, what in the world? That's the only thing organized in his room. And for some reason, I reached down and slid one of those boxes out, and I look, and there's his face, like right there, like he's hiding under his bed. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, some math test or something he didn't want to take, and so he was hiding, and he heard me coming in, so he hid under his bed. And me and him laugh about that all the time, and I tell him, now you're this big military hotshot, and I says, to me, you're still the dorky kid hiding under the bed to get out of the math class. And he's like, I still can't believe that you slid the one box out that you could see my face right there. And we joke about that all the time. He was just so different from his sisters, but I couldn't, it was tough to get him to do his schoolwork. But when he'd get a job, he'd work down at the cherry plant where once a year they'd go out and harvest cherries and bring them in, do all that. He'd work graveyard shifts down there, and he was not 1 minute late, and he worked his tail off.
Yeah.
If he told somebody he was going to do something, job-wise, or if he told his friends or something like that, he'd do it.
Just needed a little structure.
Yeah, and that's it. As his football coach, he would work his guts out. And the coaches in the high school team used to tell him, if everybody worked as hard as Grant, we'd never lose a game. He wasn't the most athletically skilled kid on the team, but he just worked his guts out. And so, you talk about the, principles and things that we kind of use to structure our lives and things you want to teach your kids. Everybody's got them. All, the three kids, Katie, Emma, and LeGrand, they all had strong points and ways, and then also ways they needed guidance, and they were all totally different, just totally different. But I tell you, I can sit right here and look you in the face and tell you I'm absolutely the luckiest guy on the planet when it comes to my kids, because I got three of them, and up to this point, they have just been amazing, absolutely amazing. I look at other people's kids and some of the struggles they go through, and I know they love their kids just as much as I love mine. And to see the things some people have to deal with their kids, whether it's health issues or, getting in trouble with the law or whatever. And I just think I would not trade one of mine for 100 of anybody else's.
Did you have any self-doubts in your early years of fatherhood that maybe surprised you, caught you blindsided?
Yeah. When, so the day Katie was born, her mom went into labor early in the morning. It was really hard labor. Katie was a big baby. And, it was her mom's, obviously she was the first, so none of us had ever been through anything like that before. And when her mom was in hard labor for like 12 hours, and when Katie was finally born, they were worried that going through the birth canal and they had to help her out a little bit. The doctor was worried that he might have broke her collarbone. And so they took Katie down to the nursery, and her mom was just completely wore out. And so they gave her some drugs and knocked her out and let her sleep. And the doctor said, the best thing you can do is go get a couple hours of rest. Well, I was wired. I couldn't believe it, you know? So I ran over to the store for a little bit and came back, and I'm still kind of in shock. Like, holy cow, we got a baby, you know? And I met the doctor in the hallway. I was going back down to the room where Katie and her mom were. And the doctor caught me in the hallway, and he says, you know, we were worried about the collarbone. He goes, I gave your daughter a thorough look over. And when he says, your daughter, I will never forget that. I'm like, I have a daughter. And I knew I had a baby, you know, I knew we had a new baby, but all of a sudden to hear that doctor say that, you know, your daughter, it just, like, it was almost an immediate anxiety attack. And I was like, I've got a daughter. And I remember going home that night and laying on the bed, staring at the ceiling thinking, all right, life just got incredibly real, because we got this little baby who is dependent on us for everything. And all of a sudden, you know, you start thinking all these things. How secure is my job? Is the truck safe enough to haul her around in? You know, is the temperature in the apartment? How warm do I need it to be so she's comfortable? I mean, and just all these things. And the older she got, the more I realized, you know, the best thing I can do is not get in her way. Because she was such a smart kid and she was so independent. I need to just tell her how amazing she is and let her believe that she can accomplish anything. And not do anything to kind of, what am I trying to say? Don't dampen her spirit. Don't crush her dreams whatsoever, you know?
Yeah.
And with Katie, that was pretty easy, because she was a pretty good kid. So yeah, there's a lot of things, you know, you worry about, like, you know, how are we going to make sure she gets to go to school? You know, I want her to be successful playing sports. How am I going to help her do that? You know, you want the absolute best for them. And pretty soon you know, you realize, because you look at your parents like they're superhuman, like they're superheroes, right? And you look at your kids the same way. And pretty soon you realize, all right, there's a 3 or 4 or 5 generation chain right here. I'm the weak link in that chain. You feel like you're the weak link, and all of a sudden you got to feel like, all right, what can I do to strengthen that, you know, so that my kids can depend on me.
Yeah. I growing up, it was like my dad kind of made it a big deal to be a Kelly. You know, we heard like Kellys don't do this, Kellys do this, and we grew up proud to be Kellys. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's the same with the Bears. You know, you're proud to be a Bear, and it's interesting to see, like, the thought just came to my head of this no quit attitude trickle down through generations, and it totally reflects in what Little Grand's been doing. Yeah. You know, so it's cool to look at that, and you know, each of those men, each of those women have a legacy, and it trickles down to grandkids.
You know, and you know, I was lucky enough to meet your grandpa a few times, and he just reminded me so much of, you know, my grandpa, my great grandpa. I guess I'm almost 6'3", not quite. And in my dad's family, I'm a giant. On my mom's side of the family, I'm average to short. Uh-huh. Like, they were all really, really tall.
Yeah.
On my dad's side of the family, I'm, you know, really tall. And so, you know, my dad, my grandpa, my great-grandpa remind me a lot of your grandpa, you know, got the roots that go back to the ranch and the farming.
Yep.
You know, working with their hands, you know, build everything they got by sweating and it was so fun to go, to our family dinners and our family reunions and stuff. Cause like you said, they made it a big deal to be a Kelly. And I always felt really lucky as a kid to be a Bair. And people even my basketball coach would tell me, you're lucky to have a name like that. What a cool name to be, even now, nobody ever calls me John. Yeah. Nobody ever calls me John. If somebody calls me John, I'm in trouble. Maybe the doctor's office when you're waiting. Yeah. Everybody calls me Bair. And, it's something to be proud of. And you want your kids to grow up and to be proud of. I always thought if my kids thought half as much of me as I thought of my dad, we were going to have a great relationship. And I feel today, I can honestly say that today, I felt I got along great and had a great relationship with my kids growing up. I can honestly say today, I have a better relationship with all three of them than I've ever had. And there's some dark times in there. There's some bumps in the road. There's some challenges that, put some stress on those relationships. But because of the quality of people that they are, we came through it. And I honestly feel like I can have any conversation that could possibly come up with any one of the three. I know what they think about me. I know they love me as their dad, in spite of shortcomings and the fact that there's times we don't agree on everything. And I feel like they know that they can come to me and no matter what they would tell me, no matter what challenges they have, no matter what decisions they make that I may not agree with, nothing is going to change the fact that I would take a bullet for any one of them. Yeah. And, that's a good feeling to have, that no matter where we're at in this world, they know how I feel about them and they know, and I know how they feel about me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, just to wrap up this podcast, I ask all my guests this question at the very end, and that is, what is one lesson you want to leave with your kids when you're no longer here?
Boy. There's a lot of things you want to teach your kids. I would say, since we're kind of following the dad theme here, cherish every possible second you can with your family and your kids, because it absolutely goes by like that. And make those kids believe that they can conquer the world and do absolutely anything, and then get out of their way and prepare to be amazed. So awesome. I'd say that's what I'd tell them.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thanks for being on. This has been an awesome episode, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and stories.
Well, I got to say, Jace, is being a son-in-law, I feel like you're one of my own kids, love you like one of my own kids. And I tell people all the time, one thing I never worry about with Katie is no matter how good or how bad the hard times are, she's got the hardest working guy I know as a husband, and I know he will always take care of his family. And that's a great feeling as a dad and a father-in-law. And I love what you're doing with the podcast. I love your passion for life and for your family, and the world needs more of this, of what you're doing here. So good job, and thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you.
You bet.